Here's my favorite budget story. Actually, I don't have all that many. It was at some point in the early to mid 1990s when my father bought his first personal computer. He was eager to learn how to use the internet and how to use all of those software packages that were loaded on the computer when he bought it, one of which was a spreadsheet, probably Excel. Now, he did many projects on that spreadsheet, one of which was he constructed a budget. Now, my mother and father at that time were living by themselves, retired, had an income more than sufficient to cover their expenses. But when they would go to the grocery store, they'd buy 2 or 3 day-old bread in order to save like 16 cents a loaf. They were both kids growing up during the era of the Great Depression, the 1930s, and people from that era, as you probably know, were conditioned to scrimp and save every nickel and penny that they possibly could, irrespective of how inconvenient it might be. So that's why they bought this stale bread. However, upon constructing that budget on his spreadsheet, my father had an epiphany. He was so surprised to see how little, relatively speaking, of his income he spent on food. Now, I forget exactly what the percentage was, but he was just so amazed. And the result of this revelation, as a result of constructing this budget, he and my mother started buying fresh bread. A budget provides the following 3 major benefits. First, it's a tool for analyzing and adjusting income and expenses. Secondly, and I think this is even more important for reasons I'll explain why in just a second, it forces you to articulate your financial goals. And thirdly, it provides you with an outline or a plan for achieving those financial goals. Now, let's talk first about it being a tool for analyzing and adjusting your income and expenses. One day, after giving a lecture, a young lady came up to me after class and stuck her finger in my face and said, "That budget project changed my life." Now, I spoke with her for a few minutes about that, and as it turns out that she was having a difficult time keeping track of her bills, keeping track of her personal expenses, comparing that to her income. I mean, she would pay the bills as they came in, but she did precious little analysis on the relationship between her income and expenses. She didn't know if she was going to be able to save or invest or build a future. All of that financial data was a confusing blur to her, and she was most proud of the fact that she hadn't yet bounced any checks. Some of you, when you construct a budget, you will find that your planned spending is going to be greater than your income. Now, there's only one way to finance that deficit unless somebody gives you the money, and that is through the use of credit. And the most convenient way of using credit is credit cards, which of course happens to be by far the most expensive way of using credit. Now, in that little video I made reviewing modules 1 through 10, I made mention of the fact that credit cards can be a powerful ally, but they can also be your enemy. So we'll discuss that in Module 5. But you don't want to get behind in credit, and you want to minimize the use of credit cards to finance these deficits. Some of you, on the other hand, will realize that you actually have extra money at the end of an accounting period, usually a month. But unless you make some sort of plan or you realize how much of a surplus you have, you're not going to be able to put that money to work for you efficiently and wisely. The problem with that is this. You may recall my video where I was folding over the piece of paper once, twice, 50 times, etc., and the stack would reach the sun. And maybe you took the few minutes to actually look at that Excel spreadsheet that would provide you with the proof of what my point was. In that video, when I folded over the piece of paper one time, the gain was 4/1000ths of an inch. However, when I folded that piece of paper over the 50th time, the gain from that one fold was about 40 million miles. When you miss a year of putting your money to work for you effectively, you're not missing out on the 4/1000ths of an inch. What you're missing out on is the 40 million miles. So if you keep that in mind, hopefully that will motivate you to start putting your money to work for you as soon as you possibly can. Of course, the budget will force you to identify your sources of income, compare them with your planned expenditures, make the appropriate adjustments, and make the plan to put your financial objectives, to achieve your financial objectives. The second benefit of a budget, as I mentioned previously, is that it forces you to articulate your financial goals. Now, here's the reason that's so important. You ever wonder why some people just seem to drift through life? Maybe you're not old enough to know any people like that, but I am, and I know several. Just drift and drift. They never really seem to get anywhere. Life just pushes them around here or there. They don't really control their own lives. It's kind of the other way around. Instead of taking control, they merely react to the verities of life. Instead of having a motor on their boat that will allow them to plow through the waves and the headwinds, they're just taken here or there, floating about, taken here or there by the wind and the tide. There are lots of reasons why people tend to drift through life like this and never really get anywhere. Most of those reasons are beyond the scope of this course, but there is one important reason that, as a personal finance instructor, I can speak to, and it is that they don't have any goals. They may think they have a goal, but what they have instead is some kind of a dream or a fantasy. Now here's the difference. A dream or a fantasy is simply some vague vision of the future. A goal, however, is an objective that you can articulate, and articulate so well that you could actually express it in writing. You have a specific date by which it is accomplished, and you are able to measure your progress. Now, it's probably obvious and a bit glib to say that if you don't have a goal, you won't achieve it. The problem, though, is that many suffer from the illusion that they have a goal, but rather than having a goal, they simply have a fantasy. An example of a fantasy is this. I want to be rich one day and drive a big car. A goal would be something like this. I want to accumulate $10,000 by next July for the down payment for a car. I can do this by depositing $800 a month. That is collecting X% rate of return that is being compounded. Now, in order to make that deposit, I'm going to need to reduce my expenses by umpty-ump per month, or maybe work 10 extra hours a month. So notice in the second example, you are able to articulate the objective, you're able to measure your progress, and you have a specific date by which you want your goal to be achieved. So that's what a budget forces you to do. So when you treat your goals, the deposit towards your goals, as a fixed expense, the optimal balance at the end of an accounting period would be zero. The accounting period usually being a month. A zero balance means that you are using your savings efficiently. So on your budget project, if you have a consistent and significant surplus at the end of each month, I'll deduct points. And that's because you're not making the best use of your money. It's okay to have a little surplus here or there, or even a little deficit, which you could finance out of your checking or your savings account. But here's what else I'll be looking for in the budget project. Make sure that you carry over the surplus or the deficit in one period to adjust your income total for the subsequent period. And make sure that you specify your financial goals. Don't just call them Goal 1 or Goal 2, unless you make reference to some note as to what those goals are. So be specific in articulating your financial goals, and indicate how much money you will need to deposit monthly in order to reach those goals. Now, also, I want you to tell me how you adjusted your income or your expenses in light of the revelations that your first iteration of the budget project provided. Maybe something like this. With my first budget project, I realized that I was going to have to cut back on my restaurant and junk food and movie expenditures in order to pay off my credit card within a 2-year period. So even if you have to make it up, tell me what revelations you had and what sort of adjustments you made. So I hope this budget project affects you as profoundly as it did my father. Make sure that if you have any questions regarding the budget project, that you post them, or whatever comments you might make, to the discussion board. So we will see you on the discussion.